1995 was a year I'll never forget. It was the year I entered the National Football League. I signed a free agent contract with the New York Jets, only to be released 4 weeks later. After that, I signed with the Kansas City Chiefs on the practice squad, to be released 3 weeks later again. I then got a job at the local Foot Locker selling shoes. This was probably the most humbling time in my life because most of the Kansas City Chiefs football team was coming in and spending more in 1 hour than I made in 1 month. January of the next year, 1996, I re-signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. But this time, I knew it would be different. I worked for 7 months, harder than I had ever worked in my entire life. Athletics had always come so easy for me, but for the first time, I finally had to work, only to be released again from the Kansas City Chiefs. And I'll never forget when the general manager called me in. He said these words to me. He said, "Although you played well enough to make this team, we don't have a spot for you." That was a very difficult time in my life, but as fate would have it, I signed with the New Orleans Saints, Sin City. I was living it up. I finally had achieved my dream. I made it into the National Football League. I bought 2 Lexuses, bought a house I couldn't afford, but man, I was in the league. Everybody was looking up to me. 2 years of that, flying on cloud 9. Then came probably the worst year of my adult life, 1998. It was my 3rd year in the National Football League. I was a special teams captain. I was doing everything that all NFL athletes think that they should in order to be popular, in order to go with the world, in order to be well liked. In week 10 of that season, I was released for the 4th time. NFL dream crushed. I remember I drove back from New Orleans to Kansas City on nothing but hate and anger, crying. I remember saying, "God, why me?" Not realizing that I was a heathen, had 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the church. So God really wasn't answering any of those prayers. If anything, God was trying to get my attention. I had made an idol out of football. Football was my love, my first love, my only love, and it was what I put everything into. Well, I signed right after that, a week later, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I had the great privilege of meeting a spiritual mentor of mine, Coach Tony Dungy. This man lived and breathed and talked, and his walk and everything lined up. He was the epitome of Christ. And I would watch him, I would look at him, I would look at his life, and I said, you know what? I gotta have what he has. And I'll never forget asking Coach Dungy in 1999. I said, "Coach, man, you don't cuss, you don't drink, you don't smoke, you got a great wife. Tell me, what's the secret?" And he told me it was his relationship with Jesus Christ. From there, the chaplain, Doug Gilcrease, led me in this prayer. I remember he came up to me and he said, "Donnie, I noticed that you always come to chapel and Bible study. But let me ask you this one question. If you were to die today, where would you spend eternity?" I remember being a little offended. I was like, "How dare you ask me that question? I'm a Baptist. Those are fighting words. I was baptized at the age of 11. And he took me to Matthew 7:21, which says, "Not everybody who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven." And he looked at me and he said, "Donna, are you doing the will of God?" And I said, "No." He asked me, "Would you like to know how?" And I said, "Yes." And he discipled me and mentored me the rest of that year. And I gave my heart and my life to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Up until then, I had 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the church. I was a double-minded man, like James said, and I was unstable in all ways. I remember the next year, year 2000, praying for a wife, asking God to please bring a woman into my life, my future wife. A month later, I met my wife, Yannette. After that, we got married, and God moved us from there to St. Louis, Missouri, where I got my first start in the National Football League. It's year 6. I am now 6 years in. The average lifespan of the NFL athlete is 3.5 years. I've doubled that. So it's year 6, and I'm in St. Louis, starting for the first time. And then we go 14-2, greatest show on turf, they call us. We make it all the way to the Super Bowl to play the New England Patriots. We were supposed to win that game hands down. I can remember that game like it was yesterday. But at the end of that game, we came up 3 points short. Crushed, destroyed. Why? Finished out the next year in St. Louis. That was 2002. And then I jumped ship and I went to the New England Patriots in 2003. Now, even though they had won the Super Bowl 2 years earlier, I never thought that they would ever win another Super Bowl. But as fate would have it, 2003, we also go 14-2, make it all the way to the Super Bowl, and we win the Super Bowl. My second Super Bowl, my first victory. And I can remember before that, I would speak to men, I would speak to kids, I would speak to people, and I'd say, you know what? And a championship ring really doesn't mean anything. And I kind of got that smirk like people who probably say, you know what? Well, of course it doesn't mean anything because you don't have one. But after 2003, I finally had the ring. And what I said to everybody after that was, you know what? I have a Super Bowl ring, and it still doesn't matter. See, life ultimately is meaningless without Christ in your life. And I had learned that in 1999. So God had allowed me in 2003 to win a Super Bowl. Then in 2004, we go back and I win the second Super Bowl, flying high on cloud nine. I finished up my NFL journey in 2007, where I retired from the New England Patriots. God allowed me in 2007 to be ordained. And it's unbelievable the things that God has done in my life. It would take hours for me to tell you all the blessings, the peace, and the joy that comes from doing things God's way. The peace and the joy from doing things God's way.